When Mia and Logan dared to explore the abandoned cornfield at the edge of town, they thought it would be a harmless adventure. But the moment they stepped between the towering stalks, the whispers began, the shadows shifted, and they realized the field had been waiting for them. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to get lost in a cornfield. The first time I stepped between the rows, I thought it would be harmless, a few minutes of wandering through the tall stalks, enjoying the rustling sound of leaves brushing against each other. The sunlight streamed down in streaks, golden and warm, and for a moment, it felt almost peaceful. But the further I walked, the taller the stalks seemed to grow, and the more isolated I felt. It was like stepping into a different world, one that existed outside of time, quiet except for the gentle sigh of the wind through the corn. I thought I was alone, but an uneasy feeling began to creep into the edges of my mind. Something that whispered I might not be as alone as I thought. At first it was small things, a shadow moving where it shouldn't be, or the sensation that something was brushing past me when no one else was there. I told myself it was the wind, that it was just the stalks swaying and making shapes that played tricks on my eyes. But the feeling lingered, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. My stomach tightened, and my footsteps slowed without me even realizing it. Every step felt heavier, as though the cornfield itself was resisting my presence. I tried to focus on the path I had taken, attempting to retrace my steps, but every turn I took led me deeper, not back. The rows twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense, almost like the field itself had a mind and was rearranging around me. I stopped to catch my breath and looked around, trying to find something familiar. That's when I saw it, a dark silhouette standing several rows away. I froze. It was human-shaped, but there was something wrong about it. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and it didn't move, didn't sway like the corn. My heart pounded as I stared, and when I blinked, it was gone. My mind tried to rationalize it, a trick of the shadows perhaps, or a scarecrow someone had left in the field. But deep down I knew that wasn't the case. The air grew colder, and I felt a shiver run down my spine, though the evening was still warm. I turned to continue walking, desperate to leave this part of the field, and stumbled over something in the dirt. I looked down and felt bile rise in my throat. It was a patch of skin, dried and cracked, with fingernails still intact. My stomach churned violently. I scrambled backward, tripping over the roots and falling hard on the uneven ground. The whisper of the corn seemed louder now, almost like it was laughing at me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep from panicking, but my pulse was racing. The sun was setting fast, casting long shadows that seemed to slither across the ground like dark fingers reaching for me. I tried to move quickly, but every row looked identical, stretching endlessly in every direction. My breathing came in short, ragged bursts as I pressed through the stalks, brushing against the leaves, hoping to find a break in the field or a path out. But the maze never ended. The more I moved, the more I felt the presence behind me, unseen yet undeniably there. It wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the light. I could sense it watching, waiting, patient. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. And then I heard it, a faint rustling, close enough that it couldn't be the wind. My blood ran cold. My head snapped toward the sound, but there was nothing. Just endless rows of corn, swaying quietly as if nothing had happened. My heart beat so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears. I wanted to call out, to scream for help, but the words caught in my throat. The silence pressed against me like a physical weight, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. As darkness fell, the shadows grew longer, twisting into shapes that resembled people faces pressed into the stalks, grotesque and fleeting. My stomach twisted, my hands trembling as I realized I was completely lost. I couldn't remember the way I had entered, and every instinct told me I had wandered too far to ever find my way out. And then, just as I thought I might collapse in despair, I felt something brush my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. The air grew still, heavy, almost suffocating, and that's when I noticed that a single stalk bent toward me unnaturally, taller than the rest, with a shadow that seemed to have no source. My breath caught in my throat, and I knew with certainty that I was being watched. Something was waiting in the darkness, patient and hungry, and I was exactly where it wanted me. I kept moving, though every step felt heavier than the last. The corn pressed in on me from all sides, the stalks swaying as if to close the space around me. My arms brushed against the leaves constantly, and I could feel the scratches they left on my skin. My hands were raw, my fingers sticky with dirt and sap, but I couldn't stop. Every instinct screamed to run, yet there was no clear path forward. The field seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, the rows twisting and bending in ways that made no sense. I knew that if I stopped, even for a second, I might never start again. The feeling of being watched didn't fade. It grew stronger, more deliberate, like something was stalking me silently, waiting for the perfect moment. I tried to convince myself it was an animal or just my imagination, but the cold dread in my chest said otherwise. Shadows flitted across my vision, shapes too large or too still to be normal. Every rustle, every crack of a twig, made my pulse spike. I began to hear faint murmurs, almost indistinguishable from the wind at first. But as I pressed forward, the murmurs grew into whispers, soft and deliberate, echoing from every direction. They didn't speak words I could understand, but they were clearly meant to be heard, to invade my thoughts, and they made my skin crawl. I stumbled over a mound of dirt and fell hard onto the ground. My palms pressed into something soft and damp, and I gagged at the smell. Looking closer, I saw fragments of what had once been clothing, yellowed and rotting, tangled in the dirt. Shoes, ripped fabric, and scraps of material littered the ground like remnants of some forgotten tragedy. My stomach twisted violently, and I scrambled backward, trying to distance myself from the morbid discovery. My heart raced so fast that I thought it might burst from my chest. I wanted to turn around and run, but the rows behind me seemed to have shifted. The way back no longer existed. I pressed forward, desperate for a sign of escape, but the whispers grew louder, surrounding me, echoing in my skull. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes moving just beyond the stalks, pale faces pressed against the leaves, watching me with hollow eyes. I spun in every direction, trying to catch them, but each time I blinked, they vanished. A cold wind brushed my neck, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent that made me gag. My head spun. I realized I hadn't thought about water, food, or even rest. The field had claimed my awareness entirely, replacing every rational thought with one terrifying certainty. I was not alone, and whatever was here with me wasn't human. Hours or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell, passed in a blur of motion and panic. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. Every direction seemed to fold back on itself, leading me in endless circles. Then I noticed something even more horrifying. Footprints in the soft dirt, too large to be mine, too deliberate to be an animal's. Beside them were smaller impressions, like the hands of a child, pressed into the earth with unnatural precision. My chest tightened, and a cold sweat ran down my spine. The thought that someone or something had been here, following the same path I was trapped on, made the dread in my stomach coil tighter. I kept walking, my eyes darting constantly. The stalks seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking, bending toward me, brushing against me, nudging me along. The whispers became clearer, almost intelligible, chanting in tones that twisted my mind. My hands were covered in dirt, my clothes torn and caked with grime, and yet I couldn't stop. Something was guiding me deeper, and though I hated it, part of me feared what would happen if I resisted. The sense of being watched became unbearable, and I realized I could feel eyes on the back of my neck, dozens of them, all cold, all patient. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. I turned sharply, but the space where it had been was empty. Panic surged through me, and I ran blindly through the stalks. I could hear the whispers now like a chorus, loud and angry, echoing from all around. And then I saw it, a faint light, flickering far ahead, too small and strange to be a fire. My heart leaped, thinking it might be a way out, but as I approached I realized it wasn't a light at all. It was eyes, hundreds of them glowing faintly between the stalks, staring directly at me, unblinking, hungry. A shiver ran through me as I understood the truth. I was not just lost, I was being hunted, and the eyes were waiting for me to make a mistake. The night pressed down on me like a living thing, thick and suffocating. The corn seemed to close in from every side, shadows crawling across the ground and stretching unnaturally toward me. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. I stumbled forward, tripping over roots and dirt clumps, my hands clawing at the stalks for balance. The whispers had grown into a low, constant chant that vibrated in my chest. It wasn't wind, it wasn't anything I had ever heard before. It was something alive, something aware, speaking in a language I didn't understand but instinctively feared. Every now and then, I thought I saw faces pressed against the stalks, faces that weren't really there when I looked directly at them. The eyes would vanish, leaving only the golden green of corn, but the impression lingered, and it felt as though they were still following me, always just beyond sight. I told myself it was exhaustion, hallucination brought on by fear, but it didn't matter. I could feel it, the watching. My skin prickled, my hair stood on end, and a chill ran down my spine despite the heat of the day still lingering in the air. I stumbled into a small clearing, one of the few breaks in the endless rows of corn. The moonlight filtered in, but even its silver glow didn't feel safe. The ground was littered with fragments of clothing, broken shoes, and something else that made my stomach turn. Human skin. I froze, unable to look away. Some of it was stitched together crudely, forming grotesque shapes that resembled faces staring up at the sky. The sight made bile rise in my throat, but I forced myself to keep moving. There was no time to process horror. I had to survive. Then I felt it movement nearby, subtle but deliberate. Something brushed against my arm, and I spun around. Nothing. The corn swayed as if untouched, and yet the air felt heavier, thicker, like it was charged with something unseen. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed that I was being circled, stalked by something patient. Something that didn't make a sound but moved with a terrifying precision. I realized with a jolt that I could hear my own heartbeat, pounding so loud it seemed to echo off the stalks, alerting whatever was out there to my presence. I stumbled over something soft, sticky, and recorded. It was another patch of skin, pale and cracked, twisted with dark strands of dried corn husk like crude thread. My hands shook violently as I forced myself to keep walking, trying to push past the nausea that threatened to drag me to the ground. The whispers had grown louder, angry now, like a chorus of voices chanting together. I couldn't tell where they came from. Behind me, ahead, above. It was impossible to pinpoint, and that uncertainty filled me with a kind of paralyzing terror. I dared to glance into the deeper darkness of the field. There, between the swaying stalks, I saw faint, glowing shapes, eyes, hundreds of them, small at first, then multiplying, rising from the shadows like embers in the night. They didn't blink, they didn't move, yet I felt their gaze drilling into me, calculating, waiting. My legs quivered, my breath came in gasps, and I realized I was no longer walking through corn. I was walking through a living trap, a labyrinth designed to disorient and terrify. The eyes followed every step, every twitch of my body, and I knew that stopping was not an option. As I ran blindly, the ground beneath me shifted. I fell into a depression I hadn't noticed before, landing hard in loose dirt and corn husks, my hands pressed into something soft and warm. I recoiled, but I couldn't escape immediately. The whispers had turned into clear words now, chanting my name repeatedly, pulling me deeper into madness. I looked around and realized I was surrounded by fragments of clothing, shoes, and flesh arranged into strange pattern symbols I didn't understand, but they made my stomach twist with dread. Some even resembled human faces, staring up at me with blank, lifeless eyes, stitched together from old corn husks and flesh. I scrambled to my feet and tried to keep moving, but a sudden chill ran through my body. Something shifted behind me, closer this time, deliberate, precise. I could hear its soft, wet footsteps, deliberate and slow, not running, not chasing, just moving with patience, waiting for me to make a mistake. I dared to glance back and saw nothing but the endless rows of corn, and yet I felt its presence, closer now than ever, whispering to me with voices that felt like they were crawling under my skin. The realization hit me in a wave of pure terror. I was not just lost, I was being hunted, and the hunters were patient, intelligent, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled so violently I could barely stand. The corn pressed in from all sides, the stalks brushing against me like hands trying to grab me, slowing me down, guiding me somewhere I didn't want to go. The whispers had grown into something worse, a low rhythmic chant that seemed to echo inside my skull, vibrating in time with my heartbeat. My breath came in ragged gasps, and every step felt like moving through molasses. I had no idea how long I had been running, minutes, hours, maybe even a day, but exhaustion had nothing to do with it. It was as if the field itself was alive, twisting, shifting, rearranging itself to trap me. Every turn I took led me back to the same places I thought I had escaped, each more sinister than the last. Suddenly the ground beneath me gave way. I stumbled and fell into a hollow I hadn't noticed before. The fall jarred my body painfully, but worse was what I landed on. The air was thick and fetid, carrying the stench of decay and something sweeter. Something that made my stomach twist violently. I tried to push myself up, but the pit was lined with layers of rotting corn husks, soft and damp beneath my hands. The moonlight filtered in faintly, revealing the center of the hollow. My stomach churned as I saw a figure hunched there, unmoving. It was wrong. Its body was skeletal but covered in corn husks and patches of human skin, stitched together with black thread in patterns I couldn't comprehend. The face, or what passed for a face, was a grotesque collage of features, twisted and mismatched eyes, uneven and staring at me with something that felt like awareness. I froze. It moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, shifting its weight, and I realized with a jolt that it had been waiting for me. The whispers were louder now, speaking my name clearly, over and over, coaxing me forward, welcoming me. My throat went dry, my hands shook, but I couldn't look away. I tried to scramble out of the pit, but the sides were slick with rot, my fingers slipping over wet corn husks. The figure rose, taller now, impossibly thin, stretching toward the moonlight, merging with the shadows. I swung my arms wildly, but there was nothing to grab onto. My heartbeat pounded so loudly I thought it might give me away. The chant seemed to sync with each beat, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The fragments of my own torn jacket, stitched into the figure's chest like part of its grotesque body. My mind reeled. It wasn't just waiting for MIT, had already claimed pieces of me. I tried to turn to find a way out, but the pit seemed endless now, walls taller and closing in. The whispers became a roar, layered with hundreds of voices, some high-pitched, some guttural, all chanting together. The figure took a step toward me, and the floor beneath my feet seemed to pulse, the corn husks shifting like living tissue. I backed into the corner of the hollow, realizing that this wasn't just a trap, it was alive, feeding off my fear, molding me into something new. The weight of all those eyes, the endless watching, pressed down on me until I felt as though my mind might shatter. I glanced upward, and for a split second, I thought I saw a path out. Moonlight illuminated a narrow break in the stalks, a faint gap that might lead to freedom. Hope surged through me, sharp and bright, and I lunged for it. But the moment I moved, the figure reacted, faster than any human could. Its limbs elongated, stretching unnaturally, corn husks and stitched flesh bending in impossible ways. A sound like cracking bones filled the air as it reached for me. I stumbled backward, my body colliding with the walls of the hollow. The whispers became laughter, hollow and bone-deep, filling every corner of my mind. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop in terror. I had been walking in circles. Every path I took, every desperate attempt to escape, led me back here to this pit, to this figure. My own footprints traced the same loop repeatedly, no matter how fast I ran. Panic and despair twisted together, a suffocating knot in my chest. The figure stopped a few feet away, and though it didn't move, I felt its gaze pierce through me, calculating, hungry. It was patient. It didn't need to chase me. The maze itself was the hunter, and I was the prey, endlessly running toward the inevitable. And then I felt its cold brush along my ankle, almost gentle, almost inviting. I looked down and saw the corn husks shifting, forming shapes that resembled hands, small and pale. They weren't real, I told myself, hallucinations brought on by exhaustion. But the moment I looked away, I felt their weight again, pressing against my legs, urging me down, urging me into the hollow, into the figure. My mind screamed, but the hollow seemed to grow larger, the shadows taller, the whispers louder, as if the corn itself were waiting for me to surrender. I didn't know how much longer I could keep moving. My body was trembling from exhaustion, my lungs burned, and my hands were raw from clutching the stalks for balance. The hollow, the stitched figure, the endless labyrinth of corn husks and whispers, everything pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat felt raw and dry, my voice lost somewhere in the endless night. I realized then that the field had claimed more than my footsteps. It had claimed my will, slowly eroding it with every whisper, every brush of corn husks against my skin, every glance of unseen eyes. I stumbled forward, desperate, but the rows of corn stretched endlessly, each turn leading me back to the pit, to the figure, to the remnants of myself stitched into its grotesque body. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the field, but instead of illuminating a way out, it revealed something far worse. Every stalk seemed to bear faint impressions of faces, twisted and contorted, some familiar, some unrecognizable. I realized with a cold, sinking dread that they were moving subtly, shifting toward me when I wasn't looking directly, forming a living wall of watchful eyes. And then I noticed it, my own reflection in one of the shapes, or something that looked like me. I froze. The pale, distorted face stared back at me, stitched into the corn husks with jagged lines, hollow eyes staring straight into mine. My stomach lurched. I tried to turn away, but every stalk around me swayed as if alive, leaning toward me, pressing closer. The whispers rose again, hundreds of voices chanting my name, repeating the words "stay and join us" over and over. My head spun, my heart raced, and a terror unlike anything I had ever felt settled into my bones. I ran blindly, my bare feet slipping in the dirt, cutting through my palms and ankles as I clawed at the stalks. But the field wasn't letting me go. I realized that the very ground beneath me seemed to pulse, corn husks shifting, roots moving subtly, and the hollow laughter of the stitched figure echoed through the rows. I thought I was moving forward, escaping, but the moment I blinked, I was back at the pit. The figure stood there, taller, darker, more impossibly thin than before, its stitched body merging with the shadows as if it had always been part of the field itself. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing, shaking uncontrollably, realizing that escape was impossible. Every path, every desperate step I had taken, had been a trap. The whispers coalesced into words I could finally understand, cold and clear. Another one, forever, another piece, another shape. My chest tightened, and I felt something crawl under my skin, a creeping sensation that made my hair stand on end. The field was no longer just around me, it was inside me, and I knew I had become part of it, whether I wanted to or not. In a moment of desperate clarity, I looked at the moonlit ground, and that's when I saw it, my own footprints forming new patterns. They weren't just loops anymore. They twisted into letters, shapes, symbols that were impossible to understand, etched as though by some unseen hand. And in the center of the pit, the stitched figure raised its arms slowly, the pieces of my jacket and scraps of skin moving like they were alive, forming new grotesque shapes in the dim moonlight. It smiled, if a stitched, twisted grin could be called a smile, and I realized then that this thing had been waiting not for me to escape, but for me to join. I tried to move, to run, to fight, but the field had me. The stalks wrapped around my legs, brushing up my arms, and I felt them pressing against my chest, forcing me to the ground. The whispers became laughter, hollow and deep, echoing in my mind, repeating over and over. And then, I felt a tan emptiness, as though pieces of me were being pulled away, stitched into the hollow figure at the center, forming new shapes, new faces, new parts of the field. I screamed silently, my voice lost in the thick night air. My body no longer fully mine. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me completely was my own eyes, reflected in the corn husks, staring back at me from the twisted figure in the pit. The field was alive, endless, patient, and hungry. I was gone, yet somehow still present, part of the maze forever. And as the whispers faded into the night, a new voice joined them. soft and cold, calling another name, beckoning someone else into the endless rows. The field waited, always waiting.